Sara Macklin, who is a journalist and also a nutritionist, and I think she's going to tell us some very interesting things about nutrition and about what we can eat.
Thank you. Thank you. I feel very privileged to be here to talk regarding nutrition. We all know it's a very modifiable and preventable lifestyle factor that we can have within ourselves to change our health status. My background was originally in fashion, which I saw a very unhealthy nutritional approach, which drove me to study a Bachelor of Science in Human Nutrition. And whilst in university, I was very aware of the outdated guidelines that they're still teaching us regarding nutrition and what we're meant to be consulting to our patients when we see them. And that became very apparent to me when my dad actually got type 2 diabetes a couple of years ago. And I was very interested when he went to go and see a dietitian, what she was going to advise him and what I was then going to advise him. And I don't know how many of you have seen it, but this is the current role model for our health today. And it's called the Eat Well plate, and I like to call it the Eat Bad plate. Because basically the advice is very misleading. It doesn't relate to the current evidence that we know. My dad was based on a very starchy, high carbohydrate diet, even though he had insulin resistance. And we know that obviously starchy carbohydrates increase our glucose metabolism and increase our insulin resistance. And many people with diabetes have an overwhelming intolerance to glucose, and then they're put on medication to reverse that. What we do know is that reducing the amount of refined carbohydrate and starchy carbohydrates, which are based in the Eat Well plate, and just increasing our fat intake from natural sources can actually really help as a preventative measure. Stuff that Aziz's book's based on and that Nathan as well has seen. So what we can see from the Eat Well plate is it was actually resized some of the segments in 2016. But majority, 33% of our intake, is meant to be based on starchy carbohydrates. There is probably only potatoes and porridge on that page that isn't processed. Everything else is a processed carbohydrate. And this is the advice that we're giving to people who want to improve their health. This is what they go to as their role model for food. And this is something that I find very hard that I'm meant to be teaching as a nutritionist, the guidelines that we're given. Also on the other side, we have got lots of vegetables, which are wonderful, but we also have high fructose foods instead of bananas and lots of fruit. And people are advised 5 a day. But we know that most people would opt for fruit over vegetables, high increase in fructose. And we know that raisins and dried fruit, which are also recommended in the guidelines of this Eat Well plate, are incredibly high in fructose and sugar, and also actually have more sugar in and more fructose in than a can of Coke. So again, we've got lots of glucose and lots of fructose, and we know from what Azim says of how that drives our insulin resistance and how that is actually having a massive impact on our health. So we're having 33% of energy intake in the form of starchy carbohydrates and a 33% energy intake, a lot from fructose and glucose as well. We then have a section which is quite small, which is the blue section, if you can see, and this is on our calcium-rich foods. They are all advised, every single calcium-rich food, to be low fat. But what do we know is low fat? It's high in sugar. So again, we're advising more sugar to my patients, more low-fat foods. That doesn't increase our satiety. We know that high-fat foods make us want to eat less, therefore we lose weight. They're also much more delicious, in my opinion, than low-fat foods, and I would opt for that any day. And then we have a very small segment, which still to this day surprises me that didn't get changed in 2016, but it's on fats, and it's extra virgin olive oil. And that is recommended to have a very, very, very small part in our diet. But from the evidence that we know, how protective extra virgin olive oil can be, and fat and saturated fat, and how this isn't actually the leading crisis of our obesity epidemic, that actually this can help our obesity epidemic and help people with diabetes. But we don't want to be advising this to any of our patients. This segment, until 2016, had cans of Coke in it. And we decided to replace the can of Coke with healthy fats, which was olive oil. So I find that mind-boggling still, that we still on the corner of our plate also have crisps and chocolate. It's still on our guide, and this is what we're advising. This whole map here is an increase in insulin resistance, and this is what I believe is driving the obesity epidemic. And this is why we need to re-inform the public and re-inform everybody here to eat real food, unprocessed food, to read the labels. All of these cans that are on here as well are full of sugar. They're full of fructose. And these people don't understand that buying these foods are only going to increase the insulin resistance. And so this is why I believe that we're in the obesity epidemic that we're in right now. 16 billion pounds a year is being related to this role model of the eat bad plate that I like to call it. And I'm only going to touch on this very shortly because Azim has already mentioned an overwhelming amount of evidence that has shown how a high carbohydrate diet can increase your insulin resistance and how we shouldn't be afraid of fat in any way, shape or form. If we literally increase our high fat foods from natural sources, this isn't fried foods, this is good sources of fat, good sources of dairy, cheese, things that we shouldn't be scared of, we would just naturally decrease our processed carbohydrates and it will become more of a balance within our system. The Pure study, which is 18 countries, found that a higher carbohydrate diet was increased to a total risk of mortality. Not just cardiovascular disease, but a total mortality risk. And they found that a high-fat diet was associated with a lower mortality risk. And this wasn't just for normal fats, this was every single fat, your polyunsaturated, your saturated fat that we're all scared of. It was shown to have a reduced mortality. And the pre-med trial, which actually looked at a primary prevention for cardiovascular disease, found that a high-fat diet had a 30% more improvement over a low-fat. So surely we can see here that the evidence says that we shouldn't be afraid of fats and that we're eating too many processed carbohydrates, which is making our obesity epidemic, especially our type 2 epidemic of diabetes, even worse today. And the message that I want you all to take home is to not be scared of real food, to eat real food, to look at all your labels, to be really aware, because what marketing is very, very clever to do is misguide you down the wrong path. And that's what the Eat Well plate is currently doing.
Thank you very much.